Hello everyone and welcome back to the Lost Wisdom of the Earth Tele-Summit. Now, anyone who has taken the time to form a relationship with the yew tree knows of their extraordinary presence and otherworldliness. My guest today is a yew shaman, and he spent many years communing with an ancient yew, which not only healed him from a life-threatening illness, but also gave him the template for a shamanic practice and a mystery school based upon its direct teachings. His work brings us directly in touch with a world our ancestors would have been fully aware of, but one from which we have become very sadly estranged. He is Michael Dunning. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a real delight to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, I really appreciate you giving time to this because I know how busy you are, and yes. So I appreciate it's the end of your work day. I appreciate you sort of squeezing me in, as it were, at the end.
Oh, it's still light and sunny over here. It's about 97 degrees.
Oh, don't make me jealous. Here we are. It's supposedly summer, and I've actually got the heating on here. You know what the British weather is like.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Oh yes. I'll be coming over there shortly to sample it too. So
well, bring your woolies. Right. Can I start by asking you to give us a little bit of your story, because I mean, just in that brief introduction, you spent years with the yew tree. What was that all about?
Well, it was a sort of a stage in a process that goes right back to right after I left the art school, back into the 80s, around about 86. I was an art student. Left art school and found myself up in the very north of Scotland, in a place called Thurso, which is I think it's the northernmost part of Scotland on the mainland you can reach. And ironically, to be involved in a tree planting seasonal job, planting trees. So that was the beginning of the story for me. It was very close to the Dounreay nuclear reprocessing plant, which was a kind of grim area, and it was in that place that I had an encounter with a being that over the years I've come to describe as the sulfur demon. It was
doesn't sound pleasant.
It was not a pleasant experience, and it was an experience that sort of ruptured my health and my sense of reality. And I've talked about it before, and I've written about it here and there over the years now, trying to make sense of it. And it was an experience that was of a being who's of a power and a presence that is almost unimaginable. And a sense that I had at the time that I was not going to survive the encounter. But I did survive it, but it was to lead to some very strange health effects, and tremendous distortions of what we would understand as reality. To the point where I was really becoming unable to live independently.
I mean, what it sounds like you're describing there is almost like mental illness, but it isn't. It's possession by something, and it makes me wonder how many others are suffering from the same.
It's a really good point, and it was kind of ironic because at the time I was actually working for around that time I was actually working for an arts non-profit. And I was responsible for working with adults who had an experience with mental health problems. So I was in and out of psychiatric hospitals and some locked wards and places like that. And my reality was so shattered. And there I was taking in books on Matisse and Picasso and trying to sort of muddle my way through and help people to sort of somehow use the arts to gain some midline in their lives. So it was a strange time to be in that, but I could really feel I've really felt a deep affinity with the people I was going to see. And I think many people have encountered very extreme situations like this. I haven't, to be honest, heard of anybody who's had encountered this particular being, this kind of being, ever. But the being was certainly of sulfur, and it was, I sense it as an ancient being, coupled to the ancient earth. These conditions of being were really linked to an older manifestation of the earth, prior to its physical hardening in the way we understand it now. So almost like a being who'd been drawn down when certain changes took place, and the way you would imagine sulfur being kind of bound to the earth.
Yes. So like the kind of, as matter became more dense, it almost got trapped, do you think?
Yeah, there was a sense of the being, I feel now in retrospect, a sort of a guardian of the early forces of the earth.
Right.
Sort of enfolded into the current earth.
Yeah.
And my sense is it was a year after Chernobyl disaster. So you know, I was there. Actually, it was only a few months, really, when I think back after that. So there I was in this really quite bleak place, you know, right next to a nuclear reprocessing plant, with this being having arisen.
Not the healthiest place on earth.
No. So this being, I feel now, looking back, this being was actually arising as a response to certain things that were going on in the world at that time.
Yeah, and you were just in the, well, I was going to say the wrong place at the wrong time, but actually it turns out it was probably the right place.
It was. It's a very hard thing to talk about, and it's a very hard thing to, I'm always reluctant to describe the experience really in fully, but you know, the next morning after the experience, it happened through the night, everything else was normal. Nobody else in this little pocket. We lived in the middle of a field and broken down caravans. Nobody else had been affected by it. It was just me. So that was a strange thing, because I knew I had been changed, and yet nobody else around me had been changed or affected or even noticed anything strange.
It must be scary.
It was a terrifying encounter that shook me for years and years to come, and for afterwards. And it's still an experience that I do feel the presence of that being in my life. Still. So it was really that experience that was the beginning of a whole trajectory of my health falling apart, and a sense of being guided slowly through a series of events to an ancient yew tree in the southeast of Scotland.
And when you say ancient, how ancient?
Well, therein lies a controversial point, because there's maybe something to talk about later if you like, more in detail, but it's very difficult to estimate the ages of these trees unless a specific planting date is known. And some of those we do have access to planting dates by, you know, in sort of monks in the 11th or 12th century and so forth. But these trees in Scotland, particularly around the tree I spent time under, there's no church next to that tree. And it is, it doesn't have a very wide girth. And traditionally, a lot of the ages of these yews were measured by using a girth measurement to give some kind of estimate of an age. So, and we'd often find that the girths would be of some of these yews in England are quite enormous. So there were certain let's say certain positions put forward that, well, for you to be so many thousands of years old, it should have a girth of such and such feet. But this tree flies against all of these categorizations, because it's actually quite a narrow girth for an ancient yew. But it actually grows out from the trunk as a great arcing Gothic cathedral-like branches back to the ground in a perfect circle, and then creates clones of itself, practically another yew forest out to the periphery.
Wow.
Creating a 400-foot circumference. So this is a vast organism. A great cathedral-like organism spreading, and it, like an inverted cauldron, I'll often say. And it
Yeah.
has a long sort of umbilical tunnel, sort of 40 feet or so long to get into it. But you have to virtually,
Right.
some places, and back then you had to sort of crawl in sections, bend down to get into. So
What took you there then? Because it doesn't sound like a natural pace to tip up.
no, it's a great question, because it was, I had been unable to look after myself. My health had fallen into such disrepair that somebody had a woman had agreed. She had sort of said to me, "Well, you can't live alone," and she had basically taken me to her cottage in East Lothian, and was looking after me and helping me to eat properly and or to start to eat again. I actually wasn't able to eat for a long time, so and it was through being there and her introducing me to a tree surgeon, believe it or not, who, through a process of visiting a pub, which, there's a story in that too, we eventually found ourselves at this yew in a very late at night. I didn't know what a yew tree was at the time. I mean, I had absolutely no conception of that. I mean, I'd been brought up in a sort of concrete sort of housing estate in Fife with where the trees were just planted as we moved in, so there was really no green there. So this to me was another world, this Victorian high-walled garden, that I was suddenly introduced to this other world that I didn't know existed, of opulence, and yet opulence fallen into a sort of a chaos. And an old Lord Balfour, who was who was related to the Prime Minister Balfour, the one who had signed the famous Balfour Declaration, and all of the complications and complexities that are around that. But he was related to that Balfour, and the whole estate had become very overgrown and quite wild, and left to its own devices. So I was taken by this tree surgeon to this great being in the middle of the night, and I entered that canopy, and as soon as I made physical contact with that yew, I knew that I knew that I'd come home. I knew that I was in a place that was going to become very significant to me, although I had no intellectual understanding of that at the time. It was a very deep, profound experience to meet that being.
And you spent 9 years with it?
I did, yes. I was to spend just over 9 years, sort of between 9 or 9.5 years under that.
Yeah, that's a big chunk of somebody's life.
It is. It really is. And it was a time where many people were, it's a time in life where it was a kind of seminal time, a growing time, a time, where I, of course, had to find a way to have some sort of independent living. So I had to really steel myself to get up and actually do interface with the world and try and generate some income and things like that. But the yew was the great matrix, the great mother for me, that would call me, would beckon me at the most inappropriate times. So I'd be
they do kind of test you, don't they?
They certainly do, and there's no ignoring the call of the yew, because it calls into your blood, and there's a compulsion, there's a compelling quality that speaks directly into your blood and draws you like a suctional force, that you really have to heed the call of the yew, and this was really the way I would be summoned, because I wasn't really feeling physically up to going even, but I would find myself there. Sometimes from the middle of the night even, so.
And during this time, the yew healed you. I mean, it helped you deal with this sulfur demon, banish it, corral it, understand it.
I think all of that. I mean, the demon for me was more like more of the Vedic sense, perhaps, of demon, of a dark. I refer to it as a darkly shining being.
Yeah.
It was a being of great sort of ancient power that somehow had in a way coupled with me at some level, And there's a lot more to the story than this somehow had coupled to me and really changed my sense of matter, my sense of density, my sense of being in the world, my sense of spatial orientation. And it was, in a sense, there was a consuming going on because I was constantly smelling as though I was on fire. People would often comment that, where's the burning electricity smell coming from? You know, it was me. And you know, electrics would burn up, and light bulb, you know, all of that sort of thing. Computer systems would go down. And my hair was falling out rapidly in great big clumps. My mass of my body changed in a strange way over a period of years. Like I'm actually quite a slight person, but I felt an enormity of density that was almost as though I was carrying this enormous weight of matter, like a sort of a density, almost like a submatter. It was almost as though I had experienced the death of matter in myself through human tangling with this whole nuclear piece. It was almost as though I was feeling something that had been generated out of a sort of sub-nature, sub-level of matter, as though I had been forced to kind of experience something beneath what we can physically support, what matter can physically support, like a sort of the corpse of matter. I felt as though I was dragging the corpse of matter around with me, and it was a density that was hard to even describe. I felt as though the closest you can probably get a sense of it's almost be like being under an enormous weight of water constantly, and every step was against a great weight. Every movement of the arm against the great
that
weight.
takes enormous levels of energy to just cope with.
It was a very difficult time, and it was very difficult to communicate to others what was happening. So it was often pathologized or just ignored, or people just really had a hard time with it, or really pushed their buttons, and they found it very difficult. It made them very uncomfortable. So there was a lot of casting off went on of you know, friends and
shedding.
A great shedding took place, and new people began to come who were somehow understood and somehow were able to help me to put the pieces of my life back together again. So going to the U was where it began to. It was almost like the movement at the Sulphur Demon was a movement of compression, of enormous compression, and going to the U was like a decompression. I mean, I'm simplifying something very, very much here. As though there was another body that I was able to discover under the U that was actually my body in health. There was another body that was able to be on the periphery, that was teaching me, that was able to reveal to me the vectors that I would need to go through in order to heal this. So I felt that the Sulphur Demon and the U, and I understand this more and more in my own human fumbling way. I understand more that they're coupled beings, that the sulphur was somehow coupled to the ancientness of the U. They were both familiar with one another at a level that I'll probably never fully comprehend, but there's something to do with the sulphur qualities, but also the iron of the U, because the U was often known as the iron wood. And, you know, we know that there's a sense I got from the U of his iron being able to subdue the sulfur forces of the early earth. That there was something in the U that was really speaks to this early sort of coming into shape of the earth, where if it wasn't for the raining down of this iron, this cosmic iron, there would really have been an atmosphere that would have been not conducive to life. So the gesture I often feel there, and it's a wild thing to say, is that the U was part of a gesture of incarnation of the earth, and a pushing down of older forces that were actually not going to allow life to emerge. And the Sulphur Demon was also almost in a sense a part of that really earlier compressive force that would have disallowed life as we understand it now.
Yeah.
So the two of them were in a dynamic relationship, and it was somehow that bringing this will sound really odd, but somehow the sulfur being coupling to me was somehow a reciprocity.
Yes.
Of somehow that being coming back into this arena of the you. And without that there, I wouldn't have been able to heal. There was a whole shape to that is beyond my comprehension, really, and I attempt in different ways to put it into language. But something around that, all of that dynamic as part of the experience that I needed to have, that without the sulfur demon, just going to a you would not have been enough. But something around experiencing that intensity and then going to the you, and actually the opposite of this sense of being opened into this
like
possibility.
Being pulled in and pulled out sort of thing.
Exactly.
That is, an amazing initiation, isn't it?
It was a profoundly visceral, in the biggest sense of that word, visceral, that's beyond contained viscera.
Yes.
And, viscera on the outside. And it was that, saying that is really interesting though, because that I tried, as one does when you're going through experiences like that. I mean, where do you go to who do you ask? Where do you get your guidance from? And there was nobody of human form that was able to help me at that time. And it was only when, through the direct experience and looking at it and just continuously going deeper into that experience without having really any choice, and slowly realizing that the language that fitted the shape of the initiation, the shape of the healing, the language that closest worked for me was the language of our own origin, our own coming into being, our own embryological beginnings, our own embryological underpinnings. And it was as though the you was saying to me, yes, look to your origin for answers. You will find your answers in origin at all levels. And one of those levels was coming into conception. And I studied that intensively, and I began to see the language of my own healing. So that the language of my origin, of our origin, was the same language as the healing that I was going through. It was the same power.
Absolutely extraordinary.
And that became a principle for me that I began to slowly over the years begin to work with as an underlying principle to the healing work, and also to the mystery school, the new mystery school. So So.
Well, I mean, I was talking to you just beforehand, and I was saying to you, I've been to a yew forest called Kingley Vale, which is in the south of England, and how extraordinary it was. I mean, it's another space underneath all of these yew trees, and there is nothing else there, just the yew trees. And I was with a group of friends. We were there to do some geomantic work, and we thought we were doing one thing, and it turned out something. I even now I couldn't begin to tell you what happened under those yew trees. All I know is we lost several hours. When we emerged from them again, the time had kind of slipped away from us, and we genuinely thought that we were at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and it was 7 o'clock in the evening. And if to this day, it's just, I go like, what? What was that about? So, I looked into yew trees, and they are so old and so special. But when I read the books, they say, over 200,000 years old. Now that's a long time, but I have a sense that you would take it back before that as well.
Well, I mean, where did you hear the 200,000? I not usually you'll hear
It will be
2000.
it will be Wikipedia or somewhere like that.
All right.
The you as a species, that they were here before the
Oh, sorry, I see what you mean.
Ice Age. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. The Taxus rediviva, it goes right back to something like 280 million years. But then if you trace it back to the conifers, you're talking 350 million. And it's a being that's been around with us for a massive,
extraordinary lengths of time. Yeah.
Extraordinary lengths of time. And Taxus rediviva was this one, and what we're thinking now in the U community is reclaiming this notion of the U as a oneness, as a single organism. That doesn't matter if it's Japanese U or a Himalayan U, or whether it's Taxus brevifolia from the Pacific Northwest or Taxus bica. It's all one being, and there's a real sense that, and I got this a lot from my experiences under the U, of this originality having been almost like Osiris kind of ripped apart. When the continents, if we can think about it in some ways as in a physical way, of the continents being pulled apart, the old Pangea, the shifts, and actually that this organism was then distributed across the landmass in the different as they consolidated out, and we have the world as it is today. Because you see a certain configuration, you look at a map of the distribution of the U's, you see a sort of a horizontal pool through the central region of the Earth that tends to follow the coal seams, and also, interestingly, the iron belt. So you can think of the coal seams as this great abundance of vegetative life. That the Earth was once so vastly vegetatively abundant, massively so, that we can't even really conceive of that now. Well, we can take all the trees in the world now, and if we were to, theoretically get coal from them, we would only get a few millimeters of coal. But you're talking about these miles deep. So the vegetative capacity, the vegetative, the depth is of vegetation there was enormous. So the world was so incredibly abundant at that time. So the U comes out of that superorganism of the Earth, that great Gaia explosion of the superorganism of high creative force, and it still maintains original creative force. That's the key with the U.
Wow.
It has shunned developments that it's a tree that has held itself back to its more, and I use this word very cautiously, primitive state. In a more, it's a tree that has a foot. It still has so much of it in the great foretime, in the great primal times, in the way that it was, and it's able to. It's almost a custodian on Earth of ancient generative force that we can no longer have access to. So that but
it gives us a glimpse or a portal to that.
Exactly. The U in its living gesture shows us that it has access to forces that we can't understand. It can heal itself in ways that are not understood. It can change its denomination. It actually stands above being a male or female, but it can actually express male one year and female the other. It can suddenly produce a male section, a female expressed U can suddenly produce a male section, and vice versa. U's that have been decimated by storms will regrow again. U's that have been cut down will suddenly regrow. I have a personal experience now of saving. I should tell you this because it's an interesting just aside. It gives us an example. In the little town here in the western Massachusetts, there's a little town called Northampton, named as many of them are after the English towns. And so little Northampton here, which is a very progressive and very hip little town here, had an avenue of 7 U's that were about 100 to 130 years old. And of course, conditions here allow things to grow quicker. So these U's were quite established compared to what we have for that same time period in the UK. So they had grown up in a line, and they had actually created a sort of an arc which created a tunnel of sorts. So they're really beloved to the locals. And these trees were suddenly for the chop.
Why?
The Army Corps of Engineers had decided that they were on a drainage dike for the Connecticut River. This enormous powerhouse of a river passes right through here. And right next to where I'm sitting right now, there's and which is really why I have my healing office here, because I'm on the banks of the Connecticut River, and I love the river. It's a very powerful river. Yeah. Great serpentine powerhouse that comes down from Canada and all the way down through Massachusetts into Connecticut. And when it has in the past flooded, it's bad news. So the Army Corps of Engineers decided they're for the chop, and I tried, and it's here in the US you've got federal and state, so it wasn't a state issue, it was a federal issue. So I couldn't really talk to the state; they were very sympathetic. Talk to the town, very sympathetic, but it's because it was a federal state. Anyway, long story short was I went to visit the crew who were doing the cutting, completely impromptu, and I just went. I gave them a lecture on the yews. These big gruff guys who were ready to go. They had already actually started working. It was a fairly decimated site when I got there. Actually, it was very, very, very hard to see. But the boss, the gaffer, was very sympathetic, and he and I really connected. And he said, "What do you want me to do? We have to cut them down." I said, "I tell you what, if you can take the root systems of these trees, bear in mind now he's already cut them down to about a stump. We're talking stumps. Yeah. I said, if you can be careful as you can with the root systems and take them and rebury them, I'll try and find a way of bringing them to my land. And I have some land in Massachusetts nearby. Yeah. So we saved 2 root systems. Wow. And
well done, you. God.
Yeah.
I mean, that in itself is a miracle.
A 27-foot truck to get 2 of these massive root systems onto. It was a big project. And
I can imagine again. I mean that's.
The root plates are big, and we got these 2 root plates into the ground. 3 years went by, nothing, no sign of life, and I had thought, well, the trauma that these trees have gone through is immense. Yeah. And just at the end of in the spring, and the snows were receding, and around the base of one of the yews, there was a little shoot of yew growing out of one of the root systems. Wow. And that shows you that out of this traumatic experience of the yew, of being decimated, of being cut back to a trunk,
absolutely mutilated.
Totally mutilated. Anything else would have died. Then taken in a truck and then replanted. And then 3 years later, this shoot of yew has growing out from it. So that gives you an indication of its rejuvenative power. Yeah.
I mean, there's a level of tenacity to life there.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes. And where does it come from? That's the thing that I always ask myself, because where does that burgeoning life, what's the source of that life in a yew? Because for me, it was a source that healed me. It was a source that wasn't available to me outside of the yew. Yes. You know, I was
going to say, I mean, we talked about, the yew possibly being a portal, as it were, to something else. I don't know. Would it be another dimension or something? Is that where it's pulling that from?
Very much, very much. And the teaching that I've had over the years is that it's really it's a being that's very deeply in partnership with what we call the other world, or in Welsh, Anun.
Anun, yes. And that's not, just for folks listening, that is not hell, is it?
It is not hell. It's not hell. That was the Christianized version of a world of pluripotency, of what the old people would call the shining land of death with a capital D, which really was a world of abundant life. Yes. So the other world, and all the Sumerian, the Sumerian tablets that were discovered, they show us this dynamic, this gesture of heaven descending into the earth, the falling of the heavenly gods, the falling of the father gods into the earth. And when they fell, they always fell into the underworld first. And that's a way of a schema of helping us to understand that none of that the earth that we understand today, of course, didn't exist.
Yeah.
And what the you was constantly showing me was that she was a being of the early earth in its most primal form, as more of a cosmic being that had contracted and involuted, and was responsible for the creation of the earth. But in actual fact, the creation of the earth is driven from the other world. It's driven from Anun. Anun is the pulse of the earth. Anun is the life of the earth. Without Anun, there would be no life. And it's that, what I call the occulted within of the earth, that the you draws its power from. It is directly in relationship to the original forces that involuted to form what we understand as the earth now. The whole idea of Gaia, as that we know in this from the Gnostics, and we understand this whole notion of the following of the Sophia down. She follows her creation downward. And she's coupled to it. She must follow it. She must go with it.
Yeah.
She must become it.
Yes.
And there's this whole notion of the you as part of that. The you is this primordial being that I've traced back to a being equivalent to the Elohim.
Mm-hmm.
A being who
and the
has
Elohim
actually
are sometimes called the shining ones. Am I right?
Exactly. El means is another word for shining. We see it all over the place in Akkadian and Sumerian, in the old English word elf. We see it everywhere. This notion of this El being this root for this shining being, and being then therefore Elohim. Yeah. And we know in the 19th century that the you was directly related and understood as equivalent to Jehovah, Yahweh, who was one of the Elohim. So there's a big story there. So this whole notion of this great primal intelligence having gone through a development that it's still going through. It's not finished. And that's what the you has to teach us. Yeah. Can we awaken to the vector of development of the earth? Or, and to do that, how do we birth the organs of perception in order to be able to go with the earth's development? So that I'm jumping there, but so this whole notion of the other world as being this originating matrix of the earth, and this other world as being the life force of the earth, and the you able to be able to draw and be resourced and sustained from that force, and as an incarnated eternity on the earth. I mean, that's what you is. It's an incarnated eternity on the earth.
Stunning. I mean, I've got a yew bush in my garden. It's not very big, and it was totally smothered by something else, which I've cut right back. But I mean, I just look at it and think, wow. But I mean, after like tomorrow morning, I'm going to be like, it's almost like I need to make an altar in front of it or something, because all of a sudden it's not just an amazing tree. This is really something else.
Its intelligence is beyond. It's an intelligence of an Elohim expressed on the earth. Yeah. And one of the things I come back to often again is that look how many people are turning to plants now and the intelligence of plants. Yeah. We know a human being knows that in order to go with the development of the earth, in order to learn from where the earth is going in terms of its development, really humans, we're not custodians. We're not adequate. We don't have the answers for that. We've proven, of course. I mean, what I'm saying is almost ridiculous because we know it so well. And people are turning to non-human intelligence more and more and more for guidance. And for me, the you was something that was really showing that in order for us to understand the earth and where the earth is going, we need a teacher who is an incarnate teacher. Yeah. Not a disincarnate entity. Yeah. Yeah. We need an incarnated eternity on the earth, a being who's been able to successfully incarnate forces that are godlike on the earth. Yeah. Now, what other being has been able to do that? And the you is really the supreme Godhead of the plant world in a way that has actually incarnated forces that are so incredibly powerful that we are talking about an incarnated eternity on the earth. We are talking about a being that is at the level of the Elohim.
And rather than recognize this amazing teacher, what have we done? We've made bows and arrows out of it.
Yes, yes. Now, we've oppressed it at every turn.
Yeah.
And because we've feared it, we've not understood it. There's been an understanding deep down of this immensity of this being. But with that comes great fear.
Yeah.
The church feared it, but yet sort of sought to come into relationship with it. And in the 6th century, in the second invasion of the Romans, they sought to take sacred places devoted to the ewe and Christianize them. Now, my friend Paul Greenwood has done wonderful research on this around Yevering Bell in the north of England was the place of the sacred yew tree.
Yeah.
That was then shifted to York. York itself means yew town. Eboracum, the Romans called it. So the first Archbishop of York began his work up in Yevering, trying to kind of take where he knew the power sites were, because they knew this from their first time around, that when they fought the Yew tribes. And in some cases found it very difficult to succumb these Yew tribes. The Yew tribes would actually commit mass suicide by eating the yew rather than succumb to the Romans in some cases.
Whoa. Yeah.
So this is a big story, and so you have the church, the hegemony of the church, knowing that in order to successfully do what they were intending to do, they needed to succumb the yew.
Yeah.
Because all of Europe and the British Isles was once called the Isles of Yew. It was sacred to these isles. Wow. Yes. All throughout Europe, you see yew tribes, names of yew tribes. You see the yew showing up in all of the places. The yew was sacred here. I say here, I'm sitting in Massachusetts. Sacred in the UK.
I know it was sacred to the Druids, wasn't it?
Very, very much. But I think
before that as well, from the sound of it.
Yeah. And for me, my sense is that there was the bards understood it better.
Yeah.
And it's a strange thing to say, but for me, the bards come from an older teaching than the Druids do. And that's always been my understanding that I'll go to the bards every time.
Okay.
I'll go down to I'll take Taliesin's teachings any day of the week, and that to me is a rich initiatory teaching, and there's a lot in that. We actually talk about that a lot in the Yew Mysteries teachings, but one of the amazing things about the yew is, and circling back a little to that, is that in all of its sentient living gestures, it tends to shun the sun. It tends to shun the solar orb in the sky today.
Yeah.
It's as if it speaks to us of a world that preceded the one that we are in now.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is often why I'll talk about the yew as being much more in relationship to the son of the ancient world, which was always known as Saturn, not as the sun we see in the sky today. So in a way, the yew comes from an older world system, when the Earth was in relationship to a different sun before the solar system was even in existence.
Yeah.
And that's a very controversial thing to say, and I've got myself in a lot of trouble from saying that. But that's what the yew showed me.
Historians blanched, don't they?
Yes. I've had a few comments, let's put it that way. And that's okay, but that's okay for me, because for me, it's more about the experience that the yew kept revealing to me over and over again. What she would show me. This is my world. This is where I am from. It was a great twilight world of endlessness.
Yeah.
A great world of an endless twilight. There was no real understanding of the measure of time. The measure was of eternity on its world. That's a description, as I found out later, of a certain stage of the manifestation of a Saturnian world.
Right. Rudolf Steiner talks about how, the Earth gradually kind of basically came into form. And we sort of came down through the layers, as it were. Is it, again, something similar that you're talking about?
You know, Steiner really, there's a very interesting couple of things about Steiner here, actually. It might be interesting for listeners. Well, first of all, the whole notion of old Saturn and the recapitulations of this notion of the Earth as having once been a vast organism that contracts, and as it contracts, it leaves behind, it deposits what we understand now as planets.
Right.
Of course, that was not the case then. It was much more of a livingness.
Yes.
But the understanding of this gradual contraction of what was once a great organism that he called old Saturn, that actually contracts and contracts and contracts until finally we have the system that we understand now, and even to the expulsion of the moon from the Earth, which created too much heaviness in the Earth, strangely enough.
Right.
You know, I think even Darwin's son was talked about that actually, if we ever, in his time, I think we said, if you analyze the moon, you'll find it's actually made of rock from the Earth. That that was a scooping out of the Pacific Basin, or what? Maybe I'm incorrect about that, but
I've heard something. Yes, I've heard something. Yeah,
scooping out of this dross. The Earth was too dense, and with that density had continued, there wouldn't have been the life on the Earth. So there had to be the expulsion of the moon.
Yes,
in Steiner's teaching, so that there was a great expulsion of this moon body. That then has a very complex story around that. But what's very fascinating about Steiner and is that he talked a lot about what he called the Hibernian mysteries. Now, Hibernia means you. Iber is you.
Wow.
And Hibernia was really the Isles of the You. So when he was talking about the Hibernian mysteries, Steiner was talking about the You. Yet he doesn't mention it one single time in his writings, as far as I understand. Now, somebody, please, one of your listeners, if there is a mention of it, he talks about Yggdrasil, and Yggdrasil is the You. So Steiner knew this, and he knew, but for some reason, through the kinds of occult brotherhoods at that time, I don't feel that he was privy to talk about it.
Right, right.
And we know that
he may have known it, but he wasn't making it public.
He wasn't, and you know, and again, I'll say another controversial thing was, I had certain visitations from a being for a period of time while I was bringing the You Mysteries work and struggling with it and trying to find a language for it. It took me 25 years. And I kept encountering this being that was sort of a pure, extraordinarily clear being that was just so supportive and so clear. And gradually I realized that it was Steiner.
Really?
And when I had the realization, he turned to me and he said, yes. And I got the feeling that he was really encouraging me to do this. I know it sounds quite grand. I don't mean this to sound kind of grandiose.
No, not at all. He was an extraordinary man with an extraordinary mission, so why wouldn't it continue on?
and it was just beautiful, just being sort of breathed through by this being of just purity and love. And I felt this absolute affirmation from him saying, do this. Yes, this is yes. Yeah. And you know, I can't go with a lot of the anthroposophical material for probably obvious reasons, but I do really value it. I think it's a phenomenal, what can I say, a phenomenal contribution, and what an amazing man that was, you know.
Well, you haven't, from the sound of it, you haven't been given a small task, have you? What's being asked of you. I mean, just in the initiation you have, I mean, you really were put through a mill. Most of us wouldn't have survived. So what's being asked of you is obviously huge. So these You Mysteries, at some level, the You Mysteries that you're now teaching and giving to humanity, they have got to be important for where we're going. So do you want to tell us, explain to us a little bit about the You Mysteries? I mean, I know we're not going to get it all
No.
short talk, but give us a sense of what they are and why they're important, because there is, I mean, the first time I heard of them, I could feel that pull. I've got quite a good, I call it a tug, but when there's something that, it's kind of, I can feel the energetic tug, and I felt that the moment I heard about these. And it's kind of like, okay, so what is all that about?
Yes, I mean, yes, the tug, yeah, that really, I think it's interesting, and many of the people who've come to the work have experienced a very similar phenomenon. I mean, maybe I'll start with just the one of the earliest known words we have for the U, and that can get us into this terrain.
Yeah.
I think the earliest known word for the U actually is Eya, E-Y-A, which is Hittite, and that means it was about 1750 or so BCE, and that means eternity, and through extension that I won't go into just now, can also be said to mean to be touched by eternity. Wow. Yeah. And that comes out of research that was done by Fred Hagenader, and that is available in some of his books, and he's done another great pioneer of the U. So for me, these figures, these researchers were very important, because I had for 25 years been struggling with this visceral, visual, healing language that was who can help me with this? Yeah. So when I began to realize that there actually was pieces of research, there was some direction here. So I began to bring all of those together, my own experience together with some of the research that's ongoing, and through that began to bring together this mystery school. So the real premise of the mystery school is to go in the direction of Eya, to be able to work with what I usually say to the students or the people who come in is that we're going to work with there are four mantles, four surfaces, four skins to the perceptual work that one does in the new mysteries. And there's a mantle of breath, there's a mantle of blood, there's a mantle of heart, and there's a mantle of mind. Right. And the U teaches how through each of these mantles we can begin to find the original shape of a human being, the original, what I call the dragon body, this original body that really couples us, is there with us when we come into being as an embryo. It's that body that is partly to do with the placenta, partly to do with the nourishing body that is there, fully sentient before you or I even have anything that can be called a body. So there has to be something first that is there first, that is not genetic. It's got nothing to do with genes. There's of course conception has occurred and there's genetics, but they're not active. There's no nervous system. So the sentience is prior to that. So there's this great sentience that we begin to work with in the U mysteries, to begin to come back into relationship with, because that was the shape of the vector of the healing that I went through under the U, was to rediscover these mantles and to begin to be able to be, in a sense, remade in the image of the original body, if you like. Now that doesn't mean to say that therefore I go around having answers. It simply means that there's a series of principles there that we can work with to begin to get ready to be able to walk into the world of these ancient U's, and to be able to birth organs of perception where we can touch in a way that doesn't involve our pushing nervous system that wants an outcome, it wants an experience, it wants to feel powerful, it wants to have something, it wants a possession. So we let go of all of that and we find these other surfaces that can touch and be touched by the eternity of the You. And by the shining beings that are coupled to You, which we haven't really talked about today, but there's the You is a world of extraordinary shining beings that are ready to speak into our sheaths, speak into our mantles. They're ready to communicate with us, to help us to be able to take the next steps we have to become differently incarnated beings, differently embodied. And one of the biggest things about the U Mysteries is to really challenge what we mean by embodiment. So what we do in the U Mysteries is that we open ourselves up to becoming differently embodied human beings. That we then, through then being gestured into that by working with the U's, we begin to perhaps get a glimpse of a body that we need for the future as a human being to continue to stay with the evolution and development of the earth. Now, I'm not saying it's a messianic message. I'm saying that's the only way that this can be done. That everybody must become a member of it. Completely ridiculous. But that actually the U's in their the U doesn't stand there saying, hello, I'm going to do this for you. It's quiet. It says, it doesn't give you an answer. And in some ways, they're the most difficult mysteries to approach because they don't really come to you and try and touch your nervous system. You have to be able to develop new organs and touching surfaces in yourself.
It's definitely not this.
It's definitely not that.
It's not your nervous system. So you're bypassing a whole in order to, I can actually see, with this sort of great evolutionary wave of energy that we're being exposed to now, and I can see why these have come in now, really.
Yes. Yeah, and the U's a great teacher.
We're kind of being softened up, aren't we?
Yes, we really are. I mean, we can go the way of the earth as we are formed just now, and as we're agreeing and consolidating in our addiction to materiality. We can continue on this path, and we can go the path of the corpse of the earth, or we can go the path of where the earth is trying to develop. And we have a choice, and it will unfold. It's rapidly unfolding. It will unfold as we go. But the U's a great teacher for that. It kind of
makes me wonder, our choices. Are we going to be the dinosaurs, or are we going to be the birds that managed to sort of come out of the dinosaurs?
It's true. And the U's a great teacher to the blood and to the heart. And the heart in a human being is not finished. It's not a finished organ. And one of the key teachings in the U Mysteries is that the heart is an organ that has the potential to be taught by otherworldly forces. But we must first open our heart to those teachings, and that's a difficult job for many of us. And the heart is an organ that has not finished yet. And if we can learn to enter the world of the heart in a way as a teacher of where the otherworldly forces can come to us and teach us through this, that there's a potential to become differently embodied human beings as we move forward into the seed of the new earth, because the seed of the new earth is being planted now. And the shining beings are involved in that.
So it isn't if that's going to happen. It definitely is going to happen. The question mark is really whether we're going to be part of it or not.
That is it. It's happening. And can we go along with it, or can we not go along with it? Do we become addicted to transhumanism and becoming the great individual who refuses to die and is going to be linked to the corpse of the earth, or do we allow ourselves to become differently embodied, which might still involve dying,
but rebirthing into something new.
Exactly.
Different.
Exactly. Do we have the courage to do that?
It's a fairly stark choice, actually.
Yes.
It's a fairly stark choice, but actually any evolutionary leap is.
It is. Especially.
Do we have the courage for it? It took immense courage for you to choose life, given the pressures and the forces that were working on you. Do we have that courage as a species?
it's really true. And I mean, I'll talk a lot about this phrase that I borrowed from elsewhere, of the over-specialized ego.
Yeah.
And and this comes out of some Jungian work that actually, I think, some pioneered in New York City actually.
Yeah.
But that the whole notion of the idea goes back to Darwin himself sort of exonerated the human brain from his own theories.
Yes.
That well, specialization everywhere else is going to lead to extinction. But the human brain knows no limits, so to speak. I mean, I'm not saying that's exactly what he said, because Darwin is much more complex than he gets made out to be.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of real wisdom there with him that gets easily washed over. But that this whole notion of over-specialization is that we have an over-specialized ego.
Yes.
That is 3,500 years in the making, and we're addicted to that.
Yeah, we are.
And that specialization is what's causing the rapidity of the demise of what we see around us. And in some ways, I sometimes feel that we talk about the biosphere, and we talk about the noosphere, which was the Teilhard de Chardin's idea of this informational sphere of the planet, that is kind of, let's say, some say that it was actually wrapped up inside of the biosphere. Other people might say that it was another layer adjacent to the biosphere, let's say. But this informational sphere, this sphere of mind in the planet. And I once worked with a Russian physicist while I was going through my healing. I was looking for, as one does when one's very sick, you look for things.
Yeah.
And I discovered this Russian physicist who ironically had been part of the cleanup of Chernobyl disaster for the Russian government. He then turned his back on that and gone to Siberia and spent his time with the Siberian shamans there. And he showed up in Aberdeen.
As you do.
As you do. Why? I don't know. I think for stone circles, actually. And I joined him in Aberdeen, and he told me that the biggest danger that we face, these are his words, were not so much the biosphere, but the damage we're doing to the noosphere. The noosphere he said was going to be the battleground for the new world. That, and he was very specific about the noosphere creates artificial bodies as beings can couple to the earth in a way that they were not before able to couple to the earth, and create influences that were not able to influence before.
Right.
So he had a very interesting teaching about that. So in some ways, that for me, the U mysteries are sort of an antidote to the demons and the demonic forces that are seeking to enter into and turn the earth into a corpse through the informational sphere.
Yeah. So in some respects, you're teaching us to be warriors to combat that.
In the small way that we're bringing it in. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. I have to say, I'm so looking forward to learning more about these. I'm welcoming you back to Wales.
Oh, I'm very excited to be coming back over. It'll be the third time this year. This has been quite a year for the U Mysteries, and my first few times I did, when I first went back to Scotland, I never thought I would be bringing the work to Scotland, and I could barely teach because I kept bursting into tears because it was too much for me to be there, to do this after all the experiences. I'm a little more stable now, but
we did a tissues with me just in case.
Oh yeah, no, I'm prone. We had a workshop in Seattle. And that was full up. People are really interested because they're used on the Pacific Northwest. So we're birthing this mystery school now in Seattle, in Wales, and right on the border, soon in England, and obviously in Scotland. And it's a growing work. It's really a growing work.
It's that something's calling. I think anybody who's even partially awake knows something has to change. We can't go on the way we are, and so this is obviously calling very strongly.
Yes.
So yeah, well, I mean, all I can say is God bless you for hanging on in there.
Thank you for saying that, Sarah. Yeah, it's been a challenging time, and you know, in some ways it remains so. There's a lot of sacrifice. I don't mean that in a sort of poor me way, but just recently too, I've kind of looked around and I've thought to myself, wow, I see people here in New England, they go off to the beach and they do, my friends are going on vacation, you know, and things like that. And I think, what's that? You know, and I don't, you know, it just doesn't occur to me. And I think that there is a certain amount of compulsion and sacrifice that it wears on those around you, and they take the brunt of it. So it's hard for people around me as well.
It's not an easy path for anyone. Once you commit to this, you're on board 24/7, aren't you? And
you are, and people come into your life. It's hard for them.
Yeah.
So you know, I have the highest respect for those that stick by me and can still ask me how I'm doing, and you know, invite me out every once in a while. You know? So
yeah. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I this is your evening, and you've literally finished work, and now you're talking to me. So at some point, I'll let you go and get your dinner and just have some relaxation time. But I can't. Well, it's been stunning. It's been wonderful, and I can feel there is so much more to learn. So God bless you for it, and I'm really, really looking forward to finding out more myself. And for anyone who is interested in finding out more, I'll make sure that your website is on the slide that comes at the end of this, so that they can go to your website and find out where you're running workshops and things.
Thanks, Sarah.
I had a hint from someone that you might be writing a book as well. Is that right?
Yes, I am. I have the basic book there. It's about 400 pages of writing, and going through the process of editing it down just now. So it's really the story that some of the story I shared with you today, but much more detail.
Yeah.
With a lot of Scottish dialect. So.
Well, we should look forward to that coming out.
It's a bit like Train Spotting meets the U Tree, something like that. If you could even possibly imagine that.
That's mind-boggling.
Maybe not a very good image, but...
Well, thank you so much for what you've shared with us. As I say, that there is obviously so much more that sits behind this. So I hope it's piqued people's curiosity.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Sarah, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you in just a few weeks' time.
Just a few weeks' time, yes. I'm looking forward to that as well.